afternoon for those of you on the East Coast, and for anyone joining from the West Coast, good morning. It is Tuesday, December 20th, 2022, and we are in holiday week and somewhat in holiday mode, despite the mixed news in the markets. I'm here today with Emily Fairbank, who is the partnership lead for Clearloop. So we're going to hear from Emily in a few minutes. But before we do, I just want to welcome those of you who are joining live. And for those of you who are tuning in later, it's great to see you too. Thank you for joining. Gosh, what to say here at the end of 2022, except it's been an interesting year. I would say not an entirely terrible year. Certainly a pretty nasty year from the perception or from the standpoint of the markets. And we're in that time of the year when all things turn to prognostication. Go ahead and turn your camera off there, because he's thinking. All things turn to prognostication related to 2023. I will not resist the urge to prognosticate, because in part, I know you dial in to hear me prognosticate, and then for those of you wise enough to look back on my prior prognostications can, see how accurate or inaccurate the case may be. Just to kind of recap where we're at the moment on the markets, I'm looking this morning, year to date, through close of business yesterday, the S&P was down 19.7% year to date, Dow down 9.5%, and the NASDAQ composite down 32%. I don't have the Barclays aggregate bond index in front of me, but I would say it is down probably, last I looked, around a little north of 10%. It has been a very difficult year for stocks, but by all measures, an even worse year for bonds and bond investors, for reasons that those of you who listen on a regular basis know well. Obviously, bond prices decline as interest rates go up, and interest rates have continued to go up. And there's every indication that interest rates are going to continue to go up, but perhaps at a slower rate, and perhaps with a little bit more intermittence between rate rises. Though one of the interesting pieces of news today was that the Bank of Japan, which for those of you who have been following at home, those of you who haven't, I'll catch you up, but for those of you who've been following at home know that the Bank of Japan has been very aggressive in trying to keep its interest rates extremely low, and so much so that it has dramatically intervened in the bond market and engaged in essentially a cap on not just rates, but bond rates by buying bonds, which has caused a huge decline in its currency value against the dollar. Why does all of this matter? Well, the Bank of Japan today said that it was going to raise the cap on what its equivalent treasuries are from 25 basis points to 50 basis points, which doesn't seem like much, but it's actually quite a huge signal that even the Bank of Japan is getting forced into a situation of ultimately raising rates. And the market responded to this with a bit of a jolt, like no one saw that one coming. Japan has been in incredibly low interest rate environment for years and years and years, and wants to maintain it. And the fact that the Bank of Japan has signaled that it's even going to let this happen is was quite a significant thing, and probably signals that we're going to continue to see interest rates remain elevated over a period of time, which is going to put a lot of pressure on the economy. And the big thing always is, well, at what point does the Fed go far enough as to really, really damage the economy? Will we fall into a shallow recession or a very serious recession? The fact that we're likely to be in a recession right now is absolutely the consensus view. In fact, maybe we are. But it's been a very murky period. And part of what we've seen is the market trade up on the notion that the situation is getting worse. And so the Federal Reserve might be able to not raise interest rates quite so much or so fast. And then within 2 days, turn around and say, oh, no, it's not bad enough. The economy is still too strong and it's going to hold up. So we continue to be in this perverse world, which in a sense we are always in when markets have to follow the Fed, which is essentially bad news for Main Street is good news for Wall Street and vice versa. And that's where we find ourselves. Not much has changed. I was looking back this morning in advance of this just to see how many times historically the S&P declined for more than 1 year. And what I found was kind of interesting. The worst of these multiple declining years occurred not in the great financial crisis, which was, as you all recall, 2008, but in fact, in the 2000, 2001, 2002 period, we had 3 years back to back of negative S&P returns, increasingly worse. The bottom was finally 2002. Prior to that, I believe the worst back-to-back years dated back into the 1930s. So, but notably, 2008 was not a back-to-back negative year on the S&P. S&P was down in 2008, bottomed in the first quarter of 2009, and then rallied back about 23%. So who knows where we're at? It is certainly, the majority of the time, we don't get that. The majority of the time, the S&P rebounds. We don't have back-to-back negative years. It is very, very hard to read this. Very, very hard to read this. But it appears as if interest rates will remain certainly higher for longer, and inflation may remain higher for longer. And that will continue to put pressure on the economy, and then it will put pressure on earnings, and then it will put pressure on prices. So what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say, like, I don't expect the first quarter of 2023 to be great. I'm hopeful that 2023 will be positive for stocks. They should be relatively positive for bonds, or at least not as bad. I mean, it's hard to imagine worse than a 20% decline or a 30% decline on a long bond. Probably that ship has sailed and we've seen the worst of that, but we may not have seen the absolute bottom for stocks yet. That makes us here at Chicory want to do nothing except continue to do what we always do, which is take the long view and make sure those of you who are in retirement have sufficient cash and short-term bonds to sustain you so that we're not being forced into selling things at losses. Part of long-range financial planning is knowing that this is how markets behave, and it happens. So there isn't anything about this that is particularly alarming, but it is decidedly unpleasant for everybody concerned. But we're not short-term traders. We do believe that the positions that you own as part of our models are good, solid, long-term companies, even if we're in moments where the price is down. So for those of you who are still in accumulation mode, that is to say, you're still accumulating. I'm looking at you, Emily, and I'm guessing you're still in accumulation mode at a glance. This is actually, just keep sending that money into your 403B or your 401k or whatever. For those of you who are in retirement, we've been planning for this for a long time. Some of you walked into retirement in 2008, and I'm happy to report are still in retirement. So, we'll get through this. It's just unpleasant, very unpleasant. If you have particular questions for me, or as we do this presentation of Emily's, please feel free to put them in the chat. Because we're recording, we're asking people to stay off camera and off sound, but we're happy to take your questions through the chat. And before, as I introduce you, Emily, I'm going to say just a little bit about our relationship with you, and then you can say more. I was talking to Liz McGahey before we came on camera. It was Liz and one of my associates, Dan Kerslis, who really did the work to connect us to Clearloop. And I think we were trying to remember, but we think we found each other through our association as a B Corp, a B corporation. Those of you who know, we are a B corporation. which is, gosh, how to talk about being a B corporation, except it's a lot of work and there are a lot of things you've got to do to qualify. We became interested, let's say Chicory became interested in Clearloop's work and in helping to offset our own carbon footprint, which is what Clearloop does with companies, and we're going to talk about what they might do with individuals. So we've been participating in that and intend to continue to participate in that. And by what I mean by participate is we actually, through calculations way above my pay grade, we figure out what our carbon footprint is as a company, and then we contribute to Clearloop in an effort to offset that by helping them, to make sure I'm getting this right, Emily, by helping you put up solar panels.
Yes.
Particularly in areas of the country that are more economically challenged. So it's both about putting, non-carbon based energy back into the grid, but also hoping to, support economic development in areas that need it. Is that a good assessment?
That's absolutely it. I mean, you could do the presentation for me.
No, I don't think so. We're going to let you do it, and I'm going to turn it over to you now, Emily, to go ahead and give everyone a deeper sense of what you guys do.
Sounds good. Let me just put my screen share on.
Okay.
I'm very happy to be presenting this with everyone today. I know Liz and Dan, I know them very well. It's been a really wonderful opportunity over the past couple of months, getting to understand more about Chicory Wealth's footprint and how we can support, because it's more than just the environmental, it's the social, it's a just transition to clean electricity. And so we're very glad to be partnering on that together. All right, great. So again, my name is Emily Fairbank and I'm the partnerships lead at Clearloop. Who we are. So we are a Nashville-based company that was founded in 2019 by 3 Tennesseans. And they all came together and realized we want to make sure that the innovations and the benefits of clean energy are reaching all communities in our country equally, which means starting with the communities in our own backyard, specifically in the South, the Southeastern region. And you may be thinking, well, we're hearing a lot about renewables in the news. There's just the big IRA that was passed. Like, why do we need companies like Clearloop to make this transition happen? Because I feel like I'm hearing it talked about a lot. And the planetary problem that we keep coming back to is that our country is still producing way too much greenhouse gas. When we look at the makeup of where our greenhouse gases are coming from today, the electric grid is second just behind transportation. So electricity, just the production of electricity, is producing 25% of our US greenhouse gas emissions. And as we all know, transportation is rapidly electrifying. So in the next 5-10 years, we can see maybe transportation will shrink, but that expectation of greenhouse gases from electricity will continue to grow. And when we look at the makeup of our grid today, 63% of our electricity is actually being made from burning fossil fuels versus only 3% from solar. And so you can imagine the impact that will have on the grid as we continue to electrify our vehicles and other types of technology that are coming onto the grid, and the demand it will have if we keep resorting to traditional fossil fuels to source that. So we see the electric grid as the biggest near-term opportunity to decarbonize the economy at scale. So the number one thing you think of then is, yes, renewable energy. But you can't just put renewable energy projects anywhere. And that's really where Clearloop is distinguishing itself against just projects that you hear popping up all over the country. Because when you look at the designation of electricity across the US and state by state, you'll see that the number one form of energy actually varies across the US. So when we look at California, for example, versus Mississippi, California produces about 50% of its energy from fossil fuels, but very close in second is 37% of their electricity is coming from renewables. In contrast to that, you have Mississippi on the other side of the country, where almost 90% of its grid is coming from fossil fuels and only 3% from renewables. And so what that means is there's very clear definition between some parts of the country where renewables are going today and where they are not. And there's many reasons behind that: policy, different utilities and their rules. And that's kind of beyond the scope of the conversation today, but just to know that we want to break down those barriers and we want to put our projects in these parts of the country, like Mississippi, like Arkansas, like Tennessee, that have been left behind in that transition, because many times these communities like Mississippi are the ones that are oftentimes low income and minority that are disproportionately left behind from the benefits of the clean energy transition. So enter Clearloop. This is where we come in. So we're a carbon solutions platform, and we're connecting companies of all sizes with new solar projects that will help to decarbonize the economy in places that need it most in the US. We want this to be a very simple process for companies like Chicory Wealth that are working with us, making it very easy for them to offset their emissions and achieve their goals, like their B Corp status. And we want to have projects that are also very tangible and have a direct impact in the communities where their employees, their customers are living and working, versus some of the other solutions today where you can buy carbon offsets in other parts of the world where you never actually see the impact happening. So the way that it works is simple. First, you measure. So companies come to us and they have a goal in mind. They have either, I want to offset 50% of this part of my footprint, or I want to do 100% and be completely carbon neutral. Whatever that number is, we measure that specific number of tons of carbon, and we equate that into an equal amount of solar, which is measured in watts. So a total number of solar that it will take to offset that total carbon footprint. And over the lifetime of a project being on, meaning 35 to 40 years, that capacity of solar that you have purchased here is going to be offsetting that footprint. And so it's just a one-for-one purchase that is directly offsetting that footprint. And what happens is at that purchase, the company, so in this case, Chicory Wealth, received all of the environmental attributes or all of the carbon offsets to then claim that their business has been verified as 100% reclaimed carbon footprint company. And so every project after that, we work together with multiple companies. So think of it like a puzzle. You can't just have one puzzle piece and boom, the puzzle is done. Most of our projects is a collective effort. So we have multiple companies that come together and buy certain quantities of solar, and some will have only one puzzle piece. Some will have 10 puzzle pieces, but collectively you have 100 puzzle pieces that come together to form one project. And that's how we fund our projects in advance. And so once the projects are online, we then have a microsite that will be available for companies and their customers to see the live and the cumulative generation over time, and to see that real tangible impact in these communities. So I'll show you kind of a little visual of that in just a second. So next, the way we choose our sites, we look at it from a 3-lens view. The first is obviously we want to choose sites where there's plenty of sun, which happens to be a lot of the southern part of the US, all across that bottom strip there. The second is a term that was coined by a nonprofit that we work with called Watt Time. And that term is called emissionality. And what emissionality means is basically where we build our projects matter. So going back to the talk about California versus Mississippi, if you had a 1 megawatt solar project and you dropped it in California with a much cleaner grid, that 1 megawatt project is actually not going to do as much impact as the same 1 megawatt project in Mississippi. And so the idea is that by intentionally putting our projects in parts of the country with a more carbon intense grid, you actually can increase the benefit. And then the last lens we look at is economic impact. So we really want to focus on communities that have been left behind, not only in the environmental transition, but the economic and social transition that's happening in many cities around this country. And so how can the dollars that are being invested by Chicory Wealth and by our other investors, how can each dollar go further where we can really invest and give back to those communities? So that's the last piece here that I'll talk about, is we really want to make solar do more for more people. So our goal is to create real social and economic impact in all of our projects. We think of solar as kind of being like a open for business sign that companies have on the outside of their business, really incentivizing other businesses and industries to move into that community, saying that they're thinking about the future. They're very forward thinking. Solar also increases the tax base for these communities that haven't had investment in a really long time. And then there's the workforce development piece of it. My boss and the co-founder, Bob Corney, I loved this analogy. He said, we really want to be the connective tissue between the project and the community. And how can we leverage our expertise in the industry and connect it with local students, with technical college students, with people looking for new jobs? How can we support that transition and be a neighbor to this community for 40 years? We're not just coming in and dumping a project and leaving. We recognize the responsibility that we have in these communities to go further. So in closing of all of this, just by shifting the focus of corporate investments to regions of the country with disproportionately carbon intense grids, not only can we achieve deeper and faster emissions reduction per project, but we can also bring in good paying jobs and spur economic investment in parts of the country that really need them. And so now I want to talk a little bit just about projects. And so you can kind of get a tangible view of what we have on the ground today. So our very first project was in Jackson, Tennessee, and I'm excited to share that it's officially online today. It has been online for about 3.5 months now. It's in West Tennessee. If you're not familiar with where Jackson is, it's about 70 miles from Memphis. And the demographics in Jackson, it's a majority minority community, about 51% Black and 45% white. But it is also considered to be a distressed community by the Economic Innovation Group. When we look at the poverty rate, it's 16 points higher than the national average. So this to us is a community that's worthy of that economic investment, that lens, that third lens that I was talking about earlier. And so the total impact that we're having with this project, it's a 1 million watt project, or 1 megawatt. And that's going to be enough power to support 200 homes with clean energy for the next 40 years. And over its lifetime, over 40 years, that's going to prevent 60 million pounds of carbon from entering the atmosphere, just from a 1 megawatt project. In perspective, that's really not that big of a project, but it can have such a large impact for the community. And really, this is just the starting point for us. So the two pictures I have here, the one on the top, that is from our groundbreaking event in September 2021, where we officially broke ground and construction started soon after that. And then the second photo here is just from September of this year, so a few months ago, when we actually flipped the switch. So you can see the panels in the background. We had about 200 students from all across the state that were able to participate and learn about solar in the Flip the Switch event. It was a really exciting time. And if you'd like to see any more about that, we have some videos on our website. But that's just a sliver of some of the impact that we're trying to do, and also collaboration with some of these events that we'll do in entering into the project opening. So when we look at Jackson, I mentioned earlier that we have a database or a microsite that shows the production. And so I actually took a screenshot from our website just a few minutes before I hopped on this call. And so you can see that right now we're producing about 0.71 of a megawatt hour. So it's pretty efficient right now. The sun is out. It's a beautiful day here. And what it's equally doing is, at this time that it's producing this much solar, it's also preventing 825 pounds of carbon from going into the atmosphere right now. And so you're able to see this live look. And so the further the needle is over to the right, the more carbon it's also preventing. And then we also have this chart. If you keep scrolling down on our website, you'll see it. But it's a cumulative look month by month at the production. And so not only can you see the total amount of megawatts of solar generated, you can also see the total amount of carbon that it's prevented from entering the atmosphere. So right now, just from being on from mid-September, we've generated almost 600 megawatt hours of electricity, which is the equivalent of just over 610,000 pounds of carbon being removed. And that's just in 3.5 months. So all of our projects are going to be able to have this very tangible impact, where you can go online and see at that moment, what is my impact doing as a customer? And now I get into Panola County, which is the community that Chicory Wealth has supported. So just a little bit about the community, very similar to Jackson. The demographics here, it's a majority minority community as well, also considered to be distressed with a poverty rate of 7 points higher than the national average. Panola County is located in the heart of the Mississippi Delta and really at the foothills of Appalachia. So it kind of overlaps two really important communities in our lens. But the impact here is 10 times what it's going to be in Jackson. So we're going from a 1 megawatt project to a 10 megawatt project. So it's going to be 2 5 megawatt projects together in the same community. And that means our impact can multiply by 10. So it's going to be enough to power 2,000 homes for up to 40 years, which over its lifetime is going to reclaim nearly 800 million pounds of carbon from entering the atmosphere, which is almost unfathomable, but really incredible when you put those numbers of what renewables can do. So we just launched the campaign in May of this year, and we are very close to reaching our goal of selling all 10 million watts of this, which is very exciting. Chicory Wealth is definitely supported with that growth. And then we're hoping to break ground on this project in summer of next year, which we would love for Chicory Wealth to be a part of. We love all of our partners to be a part of it and feel like, you know, this is only happening because of their investment. And then hopefully we'll be generating clean electricity starting in spring of 24. So we're really moving quickly, and it's very exciting that this is happening. So when we look at the collaboration here between Clearloop and Chicory Wealth, the conversation, I think Liz and I were just revisiting this at the beginning of the call, but I believe their team started conversations with Clearloop in the summer of 2021. When I joined in the fall of 21, we started talking more seriously about, okay, what is your footprint? What are you looking to offset? And it sounds like Dan did a lot of the great calculations, as Maggie was alluding to earlier, way above our pay grade, but it sounds like Chicory Wealth actually looked at its footprint going back to 2018. So multiple years of a footprint that Dan combined to determine that what you needed to purchase to offset that footprint was almost 4,000 watts of solar. So over the lifetime of the project, that's going to prevent almost 240,000 pounds of carbon from entering the atmosphere just by offsetting the footprint that Chicory Wealth has been creating over the past couple of years. And that amount of solar is equivalent to 9 solar panels. Again, that's super tangible. You can point at 9 solar panels and say, you know, this is what Chicory Wealth is doing. So it's a very exciting and very tangible thing. With that, I appreciate, I know I've gone a little bit over my expected 10 minutes, but there I'll just say thank you. And I'd love to entertain any questions and talk more about anything anyone's interested in.
So I've got a few questions, Emily, as I mentioned. So, okay, so we've got a few too. So one, let me go to one that came through and then I'll ask others. This is from Cindy. I'm curious about what the solar industry is doing to move away from intensity of carbon used in the production of solar panels, such as manufacturing plants and mining operations powered by fossil fuels.
That's a very good question. That is a little bit out of my area of expertise, but I will say that we are a part of a larger solar company. We were acquired in October of 21 by Silicon Ranch. And Silicon Ranch is one of the largest independent power producers in the country. I think they're a top 5 independent power producer. And they have really gone above and beyond in thinking about how we source the materials, how we source our solar panels. And so we are working, we have an agreement with First Solar, which is a producer out of Ohio, I believe. And we've secured enough inventory, you know, all of the issues with inventory over the past year, we've secured enough inventory for the next handful of years. And then we've also done a partnership with another company, I believe it's called Solar Cycle, that is working to have more sustainable and responsible ways of the end of life of our projects. We recognize that impact there. As far as it goes for our projects themselves, you know, we talk about how much carbon they're preventing from entering the atmosphere, but we're also considering that embodied carbon, that beginning part of the carbon, we're also considering that as a part of that, because we are very conservative about how we go and sell our carbon credits. We're only allocating a certain percentage that are being sold, and the remaining part that we're not is kind of that just in case there's weather, in case, some solar panels turn offline. For the embodied carbon, we want to make sure that we are never overselling the true impact of this project. So we recognize the impact there, and I think there's multiple angles that we're taking to reduce that.
Great, thank you. Another question from Steve. This is interesting because this is impacting me. Is there variation in your return on energy sent to the grid based on different local power companies? I know that at the retail level, Georgia Power has limited the amount of private residences that can access net zero metering. I would be an example of a private residence that has solar powers that cannot access net zero metering. Even though I was sharing with Emily at the top of the hour, I've got an app on my phone that tracks, how many total megawatts I've produced, and I look at that and I look to see how much we actually use, and I'm definitely contributing more to the grid than I'm taking, but I'm not getting full credit for it financially, by a long shot. So are there do different locales treat this differently? I mean, you mentioned Tennessee wasn't so great, maybe even worse than Georgia. Is that possible?
Well, I think in terms of owning your own solar panels, there's definite differences there by state. Right. Every utility does have its own rules and restrictions, and again, this is unfortunately not my area of expertise. I would love to have our policy and research director on board with us here. He could speak much more eloquently to it, but I'll give it a shot. Essentially, there are restrictions for every utility of where we can interconnect. We have to consider how old the power lines are, what the current load is on the system. We can't just find a piece of land and say, oh, this looks great for solar, it's flat, and boom, put it there. There's a lot of conversation that has to happen with the utility, because the other angle here is, yes, we're selling the environmental attributes, the carbon credits, to these companies like Chicory Wealth, but we're selling the power to the local utility. Right. And so we have to enter these agreements with the utilities, so they really have to be on board. And sometimes, again, different programs, different utilities will have restrictions or something that will say it has to be below a 5 megawatt project or below 100 kilowatt, which is very small, and those types of things restrict where we can go. But that's the innovation that we're really trying to bring, is having an expert in the energy and policy world who is digging into the fine print and figuring out how can we make this possible where it hasn't been possible before. And so I think we're really trying to break ground on that, and this should really be a big year for us, 2023, in exploring a lot of new communities. So I hope that answers the question. Yeah, it does. It does somewhat. There's another question here, and I'm gonna get to it. I just have a question that's sort of burning in my head. First of all, how many companies do you currently, like you guys, Clearloop? I know you're now this larger entity. How many do you work with? What types of companies do they tend to be? Yeah. And also, I'm curious as to what, if anything, you can track relative to economic impact in the areas here, because that's the point of the exercise in part, right? You're trying to have an economic impact as well. So can you speak to that? Yeah, so in terms of, sorry, I just got sidetracked. What was your first, just how many companies, for example, are you? Thank you. And what do they do? I mean, there's people like us, financial services, but presumptively there'd be other types of sectors. Oh, right. We have companies in various different industries across the map and of all different sizes. And really that's the kind of the hypothesis that our co-founders had, was for every Amazon, Microsoft, Apple, there's thousands and thousands of other companies that want to support real tangible impact in their own backyard. But the traditional methods, and I don't really want to get that's more complicated, but like traditional methods that these very large companies will enter for long, 30 years at a time, small companies like Chicory Wealth aren't able to enter those agreements. So this is a very unique way to get companies of all sizes on board and to use the power of numbers to bring about real change. And so right now in our Jackson project that was funded last year, that I showed you, we just flipped the switch on, we had 11 contributors there. And so that ranged from big companies like Intuit, which purchased half of the project. And then we had segments of other companies. So there's one called Drops that produces little environmentally friendly laundry pods. They have very funny advertising, love their company. We love their products as well. So you can check them out. So like consumer goods, we actually had Jason Isbell, singer-songwriter. He offset his footprint through the of I think one of his tours with us. We also had an author. Oh, good. Liz says she loves Drops. Yay. We had an author who wrote a book about a children's book about renewable energy. She offset the production and printing of her book with us. And, you know, then we have a major equity portfolio company, Vista, who's also a sponsor of ours as well. So, you know, it really ranges in size, in industry, because every company has a footprint. And we just want to cater to whatever it is, whatever goal these companies are looking to offset. So I think that was the first question. And then the second one was about
economic impact. Can you measure
Yes.
that, or what's your take on that?
Yeah, so this is something that our team has been talking a lot about, because it's very easy to measure the tangible impacts of solar. Like, what is it actually producing right now? But how do we dig deeper and see more of a long-term trend of how this project has developed, you know, 3 local technical college students into having full-time jobs in the solar industry, or, you know, getting visibility to hundreds of students who it could change their trajectory in school. Those are things that I think are going to take more time to develop, like what that substantial impact is. But I'm really excited to share that we have a new community partnerships lead that is coming on in February. And her job is going to be similar to mine, where I'm the one responsible to talking to the companies and connecting them with these communities. She is the one that's connected directly to the communities. So we have the opportunity to go further and say, Chicory Wealth, if you would like to bring financial support or advice or some type of webinar, we can set something up in the community of Panola County and, you know, talk to people that are owning their own businesses in this community, or something where you can connect the dots to the actual community itself. And that's going to be her role. And so there can be some tangible, measurable things behind that. But I think long-term, she's also looking at how can we track that impact. I think that's a long-term goal that we have.
Right. Yeah, because that's part of the whole piece, right? It's
Yes. Yes.
right. So a question from Jim: is there a formula for measuring an individual family's carbon footprint and translation into number of solar panels? There is. Because that's what we used when we tried to track our own footprint. For example, we have both solar, thermal, and 34 photovoltaic panels. Drive mostly an electric vehicle. Would love to know how much our footprint is over these individual efforts, and what an individual investment might be, ROI might be. So in other words, and that brings me to the question of, so that you're focused on companies wanting to offset their footprint. What, if anything, is there available for individuals to do, or is that not through Clearloop?
Unfortunately, that is not with Clearloop today.
Right.
I don't want to say it will never be, but right now we are really focused. We're a B2B company. So in a way, you know, we're connecting directly to the businesses themselves, but by working with the businesses, a lot of the businesses are offsetting the footprint to ship to their customers. So Drops, for example, is one that has offset the shipping footprint. So their scope 3 footprint of all of the packages that are being shipped to Liz. She's buying a lot. So they're determining all of them. They're determining how many.
Whoop. Emily froze. She's on solar and the sun just came out. Only kidding. Just a joke. Emily, are you still there? We'll give her a second. Hoping it's not me that froze. Liz, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. It's Emily. So we'll
Okay,
just
good.
wait.
Just double checking.
She'll come back in a sec.
Okay, we'll give her a minute.
Meanwhile, I'll go check all that laundry I've been doing with
Yeah,
Drops.
right. All that Drops. That's right.
It is a great company, by the way.
Rotate that laundry. Good.
I've been using it for a while. So they also have dishwasher pods. And so
Be interesting if there was some way to like work together to offset a whole community. Like if Drops, I'm blue skying here. She's gonna have to rejoin, so I'm gonna fill the airtime here. But I was just there she is.
I apologize. I'm
No,
sorry.
no worries. There was a moment where I wasn't sure if it was me or you, but I was just thinking about, the way in which it is impossible for individuals, but like you were saying, like something like Drops was trying to seek how to offset its footprint in terms of delivering its goods to customers.
Mhm.
It'd
Mhm.
be interesting if there was some way that companies could connect to their customers and like push it through to a clearly, I don't know what that would look like. I'm just,
We have experimented with that before where, in the purchase process itself, the customer could say, hey, I want to pay an extra 5 cents and offset the shipping of this package to myself. And I
Yeah.
don't think that that's out of the question for, we are scaling, we're testing a lot of things, we're seeing what works. And if something doesn't work, we're trying it again. So that's why I don't want to say B2B to C or B2C is a never thing. I think that it's just not something we're doing right now.
Yeah.
But there are options out there. I mean, there are so many different ways that customers, individuals can offset their footprint. I think the most important thing that I would say is know where that impact is going. A lot of it, as I mentioned earlier, can be in places of the world where it's really hard to know, is this tree really being planted, or by purchasing this clean cook stove, is it really preventing another cook stove that's dirtier from being used in the same community? Like, it's very hard to measure some of these impacts. And so I would just say, do your research and make sure it's a reputable company that, maybe you can track that impact over time. So I hope that that's an area that can grow, because if we think about, for every Amazon and Apple, that there's thousands of other companies, I would then go further and say, and for every thousands of companies, you have thousands and thousands of individuals. And when we think about that impact, if we could really harness the power of individuals, I think that
Sure.
could increase our impact even more. So definitely something to think about.
So just out of curiosity, you guys are you're a subsidiary of Silicon Ranch, which is a for-profit entity,
Yes.
which makes its money by selling carbon offsets and also selling power back to the grid, right?
So actually, that's where there's a distinction.
Yeah, tell me about the business model. I'm curious what the business model is. Yeah.
Yeah. So Silicon Ranch's specialty is in very large projects. So projects for Meta, for VW. And these are the projects I was alluding to earlier, where companies, any smaller than the ones I just listed, no one has access to it. You have to enter what's called a PPA, or a power purchase agreement, which is one of the traditional financing methods for these projects. And it really excludes 99.999% of the companies out there. And so they're the ones working on very, very big 50, 100, 500 megawatt projects, but they've really specialized how to do it in actually areas of the Southeast. So they're specialized in this region, and Georgia specifically. I think they're the number one power producer, independent power producer in Georgia.
You're the ones who are getting the dollar to dollar offset, and I'm not, but that's okay.
Yeah.
Don't hold it against them. Okay, go ahead. I'm still listening.
So their business model is different. They're doing these
Right.
large scale PPA based projects. What we are doing is a different financial lever that we're using to finance smaller projects, where you're actually separating out the environmental attribute and the power, because those are the two outputs from these projects themselves. And in a PPA, the customer is getting both.
Yes.
Can get both. In this instance, we're separating it out. So Chicory Wealth is only getting the environmental attributes, but the local utility is getting all the green, or what we call brown power, but I feel like that's a bad term because it's clean energy. So that's the distinction between, so we're really kind of this like experimentation arm of how can we take solar projects and go beyond and be innovative and sell the carbon credits that are coming off of it. Because in the end, if we're truly trying to decarbonize the grid, we have to think about the carbon impact behind the electricity generation. We can't just think of it as, 1 megawatt hour of electricity for, 1 credit. You have to consider that true carbon impact behind it all.
Okay, so basically you're in the business of selling to smaller companies the ability to offset their carbon footprint. So, and the ability for someone like us, who's a B corporation and wanting to maintain that status because it matters, it's a reputational advantage to us, to be able to say, no, we are genuinely offsetting our footprint and here's how we're doing this, right? Got it.
Exactly. Exactly.
Okay.
And it's not just small. I mean, we like Intuit is a partner. We actually just announced a few months ago a partnership with Rivian, one of the
Oh, yeah.
makers
Rivian,
on the
yeah.
market. And so there's a lot of exciting opportunities with bigger companies too. It's just a different way for them to think about how to offset their footprint, because in the traditional method that I was talking about earlier with Silicon Ranch, that's really just addressing the scope 2 footprint, which is focused on just electricity. But with our projects, we can help companies like Amazon, like Apple, like Meta offset their scope 3, which is really talking about the customers. How much electricity are you causing when every person's charging their iPhone? Now Apple can take responsibility for that. And just say they're not a customer of ours. That's
Every
just
time I order from Amazon and a truck pulls up, does Amazon offset that?
Well, that's exactly the idea, though, is that with us they could, but before they can't do that in a one-to-one comparison with the PPA, because that's just looking at the electricity generation versus the carbon behind the deliveries themselves.
So just a question again about the business model. So just somebody was saying, well, but wait, just so we understand, how much of the revenue for Clearloop comes from selling the power versus selling the offsets?
Very good question. Think about selling the offsets just like a down payment on a house. We're just trying to get a certain amount of money to go and essentially get confidence from the bank financing to fund the project itself.
So we're the
really
capital investors. Those of us who are buying our offsets are the initial capital investment.
Yes. Without your investment, that project would never happen, which is one of the biggest criteria for carbon offsets. You'll hear additionality, which means without your investment, it would never happen. So
Right.
That's what you're truly doing here, is that gives us the ability to go and say, can we borrow the rest to build this project? And then pretty much all of the revenue is coming from the sale of power. Now, to be said on that end, though, it still is a discount to the community. So we're still going to be selling them power for cheaper. I mean, I would say that with great certainty, but most of the time cheaper than what they're purchasing from it already. So there's an incentive there for the utilities, but it can be a different process and a scary thing for utilities. So there's also kind of that learning curve.
In other words, some utilities don't want to be investing in solar because they're not sure. In other words, like you go into Mississippi and the utility companies may or may not have been themselves investing in solar.
Yeah, I think some of it is just uncertainty about. I have a cat that's
Yeah, came out of the
she wants to say a word on that. Yeah, I think there are a lot of nuances to it that I transparently don't understand as well as well, I'm learning about it every day, but I think that's a lot of it is just the learning curve. And so we're trying to come in and educate some of these smaller utilities that have never had the opportunity to have clean energy interconnected into their grid. What does that mean? How much do I charge?
Right. And they're still learning too. And in the case of like the Rivian you mentioned, would you think that would the Rivian be an example of because they're a pretty big company, or at least they're trying to be, would they just be they would just be the capital investment, but not necessarily buying the power? They're just doing what we're doing, only on a larger scale, presumptively, because they have a much larger carbon footprint.
Yeah, exactly. So none of our customers are ever procuring the power. The only taker of the power itself is going to be the local utility.
Right.
So the output here for the customers is only in the form of carbon offsets, or sometimes we'll do RECs in special deals with certain companies. But the carbon offset is the most true way to value the impact on a 1-for-1 scale.
Got it. Yeah, because the places you're looking at are places that don't have there'd be no way for a big company isn't in Panola, Mississippi to
Exactly.
Power.
Exactly.
That's part of the point of setting up there, is because they're never going to get that unless you set up there with these local utilities. Nobody's going to come around to do it because nobody else has an interest in doing it unless they're looking at it from that impact lens. There's no financial incentives unless you cause it to be so.
Exactly.
Obvious financial incentives, essentially. Yeah. Very interesting. Very interesting. Well, this is great. Well, so just to go back to, and again, you're not a scientist necessarily who measures everybody's carbon footprint, but there are certainly ways for individuals, although I heed your warning that you want to make sure if you're buying or paying extra for something, that in fact the carbon offset is really happening. So you
Yeah.
want to be careful about that. But there surely are calculators online where you could
Yes.
put in your normal activities and calculate your total carbon footprint, right?
Certainly.
Do you have
There
any, do you have any in particular that you like that come to you that you would say, oh, go to this website or that website, anything that you might
I would
offer?
love to say I
I've
have.
looked at some myself, but I don't.
I know the EPA has one that I've used before, and that's a trusted source, being a governmental entity. But
Mhm.
again, it's really, really hard. I'll just also give a disclaimer here to give a very accurate number with some of these free tools, because there's things that you don't even expect in your life that cause electricity, having a lamp plugged in your wall that you didn't even know, or I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but these tools aren't always capturing the entire essence of your footprint, but they're a really good start to get an idea. And it sounds like, Maggie, you use something to understand how many solar panels you would need to put on your house. I think those tools suffice for that. If you're just a customer that says, I want to do a good enough job to just do something to prevent, my footprint from increasing. So do you recall what tool?
I'm looking for, there was a tool I had connected and it was actually monitoring, God help me, God only knows what else it was monitoring, things that I was purchasing, etc. I can't remember the name of the tool and I'm trying to find it. I mean, the tool I'm looking at right now, if you see me looking down, is the My Solar Edge, which just tracks, actual production of solar power. So year to date, I'm happy to report that we have saved 5,871.1 pounds of CO2 emissions and the equivalent of 44 trees planted. So I don't know if this is what's tied to my panels. I'm sure any of you who are listening who have solar panels have a similar app. There is another application and I can't call it. I have to look it up, but I know there was one that would essentially monitor your spending and do an estimate of your carbon footprint, which even as I speak that, I think monitor my spending. Is this a good idea? I guess everybody, I guess there's no such thing as not having everybody inside of your data these days, but.
Well, I mean, I think in the end, it's really, you're just trying to reduce your impact. You're just trying to do the best you can. There's no governing body monitoring saying, Maggie, you must offset 100% of your footprint. And if not, you're going to get in trouble.
Right.
So, I don't take those numbers super seriously. I would just say, if you feel like you really are led to offsetting your footprint, one, I think that's great. And two, I think just do your research and make sure it's, a legitimate verified business where you feel like there's an impact that you're passionate about and could be, have some personal connection to you. But the numbers themselves, I wouldn't get too caught up on that on a personal level. Where you get into a little bit more trouble is when we talk to companies that are making very specific claims and they're using tools that are free, or they're not doing a very deep analysis. We can't verify that on our own. All we can say is the number you gave us, whatever you gave us, that's
whatever number you gave, we can offset. We know
we can offset
we
it,
know
but
what that is.
if your number is higher, I'm just going off the number you gave me. And so,
Sure.
Yeah, I think the tools part is one that I would like to understand more as we go into the new year.
Right.
Oh, it looks like Liz.
Yeah, shopneutral.io.
Well, that's a great resource. Thank you.
And just simply a list of how to reduce carbon footprint in our lives and continue to try this. Right, exactly. There's lots of ways, minimizing driving, minimizing travel. I mean, there are lots of big ways that you can reduce your carbon footprint. Well, other questions for the good of the order before we wrap up here? This is our last webinar of 2022. We will be seeing you again in early 2023, but I want to give last call for any questions for me or for Emily before we sign off. Oh, so incredibly important. Thank you. Yes, thank you. It was actually, I'm delighted to have you. I'm really glad. Thank you for taking the time to come on.
Absolutely. This is a pleasure. I love talking about what we're doing and spreading the word. So although we can't, really support the individual contributions right now, if you know anyone that owns business or,
that's what I'm thinking. There should be some ways for us as people who are mindful, and we're also, at Chicory, we're part of this larger B Corp network.
Yes.
I would think that would be a ready group for you to be, particularly those of us in the Southeast, where we could be also having a kind of more localized impact.
Absolutely.
So yeah, if you need a referral, feel free to have somebody call us. And we'll refer you guys, but we'll try and
Sounds
keep our
good.
eyes open for that too. But
Well,
Well, I
I'll
guess-
be happy if any of your clients or anyone on this call has questions afterward that they
Yeah.
want, or just want to get in touch and talk more. More than happy to send along my email address, and would love to talk with you in the new year.
I would think that one of the most, and I'm sure you can help with this a little bit, but probably one of the most intimidating pieces would just be trying to figure out what the hell your impact is, right?
Yes.
So, I mean,
Yes,
that's
just
probably,
starting.
they have a little bit of a chilling effect. Yeah, and we'll share some resources in a follow-up email, but
Great.
we'll persevere on that. Anyhow,
Okay.
thank you very, very much. Thanks to all of you who joined today, and for any of you who are listening on the recording, we're glad to have you, and hope you all have a wonderful, wonderful remainder of the year, holiday season, and here's to a great and hopefully more fruitful 2023, at least from a financial perspective. We'll hope for the best. Otherwise, thank you all, and thanks again, Emily. Take care.
Thank you so much, everyone. Happy holidays.
All right, take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.